Welcome back, guys. It's Israel, and today I want to talk about two interfaces that are crucial in how we build our .NET APIs, because obviously we want them to be as efficient as can be when we are working with data and databases. And these two interfaces would be, you guessed it if you clicked on this video, IQueryable and IEnumerable. I'm going to compare them, tell you and show you how they work, and how using them correctly in your .NET APIs can make a huge performance difference. So let's get into it. So let's talk about IQueryable versus IEnumerable. How are they different? How are you actually supposed to use them? And how do you already use them within your .NET API? Because you might not even know that you're already using them, right? So they are obviously first, both interfaces used for holding data and querying in C#, but they function differently. IEnumerable queries the database and pulls in the full table of data. So it pulls all the data into memory. And then regardless of whatever conditions you have on your link query, where clauses, etc., it then only applies those filters once it's in memory. So you're storing everything in memory on your application, and then you're filtering. You're not doing it in the database. So obviously it would be better for smaller data sets when you want to pull in that data, not for a ton of data because that could slow down your application. IQueryable, on the other hand, executes the full link query, including your filters, in the database. So once the link query is translated to SQL, it will also include your where clauses or other filters, etc., execute in the database, and then give you only the exact results you want, right? So for big data sets and you want maybe complex objects, you wouldn't want to pull it all into memory and then filter. You would want to just make sure it all executes in the database and it just comes back so it's easier to process. IQueryable also allows you to build your queries in multiple steps and only actually go and retrieve from the database the results you want from your query when you actually need to iterate or need those results from the database. So that is by doing a for each or calling toList on something. That's when the query will actually execute. And this is called deferred execution. So just how do you actually use it in your .NET API? Because you guys might not even be aware, as maybe I was as well, like when am I using IQueryable or IEnumerable? I've been making APIs for years, but I haven't really thought about that deep. Well, it's because usually when you're working with databases, you are using IQueryable to get data, then converting it to an IEnumerable using something asynchronous, such as a toList async. And I'm going to show you guys the examples so you guys get exactly what I'm telling you guys when it comes to retrieving with IEnumerable, retrieving with IQueryable, and what you probably are already doing, so you guys understand and be like, oh, I'm already doing that, duh, this makes more sense. So let's see when we actually get into the code, but I just have one more slide for you guys. This is just a more visual representation for you guys of what I just explained in the last slide. So for IEnumerable, you filter over here in your application. You go do your query, bring back all the records from the database, and then you filter over here. While IQueryable, in your application, you're not doing any of that. You do the query with all the filters, you filter over here, and then get only the filtered records. So that is a more visual difference for those of you that are visual learners. But now onto the code so you guys get another more visual representation of how it works in your .NET APIs. But right before I show the code examples, I want to quickly thank my channel members for their support. If you want to see your name here and get access to all my code for all my videos, click the join button on my profile or click the link in the description below and then shoot an email to this email address with the code that you want. Thank you, and on to the code. Okay guys, so now we're at the code. This is a .NET API that I have. I'm just going to run it really quick so you guys can just see that it's just a random API that I have that I've used in other previous videos. It is a .NET 8 API. It's a basic CRUD application with 4 endpoints. As you can see, get Pokemon, create Pokemon, edit Pokemon, and delete Pokemon. So that is what we're going to do. And we're really just going to run the get Pokemon because I just want to show you guys how the IEnumerable work, IQueryable work, and then also how we already you probably use it in our application, but we don't really even think about it. This is just the way that you do things. So I'm going to open up the get Pokemon here and try it out in a little bit. And I'm just going to move it off screen because it doesn't really matter what we're returning. But in our DB, we just have this one table with Pokemon, and we're just going to be returning this list, but also filtering based on this ID. But that's all that you really need to know there. But other than that, in here, I'm just going to walk you guys through the examples. So right here, this is going to be the IEnumerable example. So as we see here, we create an IEnumerable with the Pokemon model. And then we're going to do our db context.pokemon, bring in the IEnumerable, and then filter and just get the first one that matches this ID. So what do we expect here? From the graphics that I showed you guys before, this should pull in the whole table of data and then filter in memory. So if I were to go to my SQL database and check the query, we would not have anywhere in the SQL, right? It would execute only the select all, and then there would be no filter. Down here in this next one, what we have is now the IQueryable with, again, the Pokemon model. We will again see we get the Pokemon table. And then in here, we're going to do another where clause and get by the Pokemon ID. So the exact same thing we're doing in 2. But since this is an IQueryable, this will only contain logic. And only until we call this first or default will it go to the database. So if we look at the SQL, in the SQL database, whenever this one comes in, we will see that it has this where in there, where it will be looking like, hey, get only the Pokemon ID equals the 1. Don't bring me back everything for here. So let's run these first 2, and I'm going to show you guys kind of what it looks like in the SQL server. So as you guys can see, both of them have already finished running. So now let me show you guys the SQL for the IEnumerable and the IQueryable, so I can prove to you guys that my diagram was not a lie. So let's bring in this here. This is the SQL Server Profiler. So we have these 2 right here. So if you see this one, this is the IEnumerable one. And what does it do? It does a select, Pokemon ID, name, Pokedex number, region ID, and type ID from Pokemon as P. No filter, no nothing. If you go in here and you click the view, you're going to see that you get the whole table in here. So let's close that. And now this second one, obviously the second one is going to be this one down here. As you see, this one's slightly different because it has a where clause. This is the IQueryable executing. This is a select top 1, and it brings back everything from the table from Pokemon, but where Pokemon equals 1. That is this IQueryable right here. And now let's click continue. Now you guys at least see how the link to SQL happens. But now what is this last example that I have here? Well, if you guys just ignore this stuff up here, this is what I said whenever I promised you guys I would explain to you what happens in your .NET API. I'm sure a lot of us have worked with DB context before and tables and queried them and been like, that's the normal thing to do, right? Why do we even, I don't even have to think about this. Well, let me explain to you what's actually happening behind the scenes so you guys are more well-informed when it comes to, hey, do I use IQueryable or IEnumerable? Well, what's actually happening in this example right here, if we remove this, and that example is right here, if we remove the toList async, what we are doing right here is just an IQueryable Pokemon model, as you see right there. Why? Because here, all we're doing is building the logic to the query. Once we actually call toList, we now turn this from an IQueryable to an IEnumerable, and a version of that is a list. A list is a version of an IEnumerable. So what we're doing here is we're actually creating an IQueryable, and then once we call this, we are now turning it into a list or an IEnumerable. So that is what's actually happening behind the scenes in your APIs. And maybe you knew this, maybe you didn't, but that is the difference between an IEnumerable and an IQueryable. One is in memory, IQueryable is not. It executes on the database. And now that you've learned about IQueryable and IEnumerable, maybe you want to learn a little bit more about LINQ? Well, click on this video right here.